At 25, Ryan and Lisa both walked into the same office building for the first time. Same company. Same salary, $55,000 a year. Same city. They lived in the same apartment complex, actually, just 2 floors apart. Every morning, they'd grab coffee from the same place on the corner. Sometimes they'd even ride the elevator together, laugh about the commute, complain about the weather. From the outside, their lives were nearly identical. Fast forward 15 years. Ryan is 40. He has $520,000 in investments, 0 debt, and something most people his age have quietly stopped believing in, options. He could walk away from his job tomorrow and be financially stable for years. He sleeps well. He doesn't check his bank account with dread. Money, for Ryan, has become something that works quietly in the background of his life, like an engine running smoothly beneath the hood. Lisa is also 40. She has $12,000 in savings, most of it sitting in a checking account earning almost nothing. She has $23,000 in credit card debt. And there's a specific feeling she gets every time she opens her banking app. Not curiosity. Not confidence. A knot. A low, persistent anxiety that follows her through the month like a shadow she can't shake. Same starting point. Same income trajectory. The same coffee shop on the same corner for the first 3 years of their careers. A $508,000 gap. And here's the part that matters, the part that makes this story worth paying attention to. The gap didn't come from luck. It didn't come from inheritance, or a windfall, or some investment tip Ryan got that Lisa didn't. It came from 8 decisions. 8 ordinary, completely unremarkable decisions that both of them made in their 20s, when they were both absolutely certain they were too young to worry about money. That certainty was the most expensive thing either of them ever believed. There's a force running through every financial life, whether you're aware of it or not. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't reward effort or punish laziness in any obvious, immediate way. It simply runs, quietly, consistently, in whichever direction you've pointed it. Compound interest is one of those concepts that almost everyone has heard of and almost no one has truly felt. Not intellectually. Emotionally. In the gut, where financial decisions actually get made. Here's what it actually means in a life like yours or mine. If you take $100 a month, less than most people spend on subscriptions they've forgotten they have, and you invest it starting at 25, by the time you're 65 you'll have roughly $264,000. Not because you contributed $264,000. You contributed $48,000. The rest, $216,000, came from the money making money, year after year, decade after decade, quietly compounding in the background while you lived your life. Now take the exact same $100 a month. Same discipline. Same consistency. But start at 35 instead of 25. By 65, you have $122,000. The 10-year delay, just 10 years of thinking, I'll get to it later, cost $142,000. From $100 a month. Morgan Housel wrote in The Psychology of Money that wealth is not about how much you earn. It's about how long you let money grow undisturbed. That patience, he argued, is rarer than any financial strategy, because it requires doing almost nothing, which turns out to be psychologically harder than doing something. Your 20s are not too early to think about money. They are, mathematically, the most valuable financial decade of your life. Not because you earn the most then. You almost certainly don't. But because time, specifically, the time between 25 and 35, is a resource that cannot be recovered at any price. You can earn more money. You can cut expenses. You can find better investments. You cannot buy back the compounding years you didn't use. Ryan and Lisa didn't know this at 25. Most people don't. And that gap in understanding, not in income, not in intelligence, not in ambition, is exactly where the $508,000 was born. Ryan opened a Roth IRA at 25. He didn't have a sophisticated strategy. He didn't read investment books or study market cycles. He just opened an account, set up an automatic transfer of $200 a month, and mostly forgot about it. That's the entirety of what he did. Lisa told herself she'd start investing when she made more money. It felt responsible, actually, almost practical. Why invest a small amount now when she could invest a larger amount later, once she was more financially stable? It was the kind of logic that sounds completely reasonable until you sit down and do the math. By the time Lisa was 30, Ryan had $16,000 invested. The market had dipped a couple of times, it always does, so the account value was fluctuating. But the money was there. The habit was there. The compounding had started. Lisa had zero. Now here's where the story takes a turn that feels almost unfair. Ryan's first 5 years of investing, just those 5 years, just $200 a month from age 25 to 30, by the time he was 40, that specific money alone had grown to $89,000. Not from the contributions he made after 30. Just from the money he put in during those first 5 years, which had 15 years to compound. Lisa started at 32. Same $200 a month. Same discipline. But she could never catch up, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because the math of those missing early years had already locked in a result. $200 a month, invested from 25 to 65 at a 7% average annual return, which is roughly in line with the long-run historical average of a broadly diversified market index, grows to $528,000. The same $200 a month, starting at 32, grows to $316,000. The cost of that 7-year delay, 7 years of "I'll start when I make more money," is $212,000. Behavioral economist Hal Hershfield has spent years studying why people delay saving for the future, and what he found is both fascinating and a little unsettling. When people think about their future selves, the part of their brain that activates is not the part associated with thinking about themselves. It's the part associated with thinking about strangers. Literally, neurologically, we experience our future selves as different people. Someone else's problem. And we wouldn't sacrifice our present comfort for a stranger, would we? Lisa wasn't irresponsible. She was human. She was optimizing for the person she was at 25, without quite realizing that the person she'd be at 40 was also her, and was waiting on the other end of every decision she made today. The fix isn't complicated. It's almost insultingly simple. Open an account. Put in $50. Set it to automatic. The amount matters far less than the starting. Because what you're really buying, more than any return or any fund, is time. And the only way to buy time is to start before you feel ready. Around 27, both Ryan and Lisa got a raise. Their company was doing well, performance reviews had gone smoothly, and suddenly there was an extra $10,000 a year coming in. $833 more per month. It felt good. It felt like progress. Ryan had made himself a simple rule before the raise arrived. Half of every raise goes to savings and investing. Half goes to enjoying. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a split. He got to feel the raise. He got to upgrade one thing, eat out more, spend a little more freely. But half of it disappeared quietly into his future before he ever got used to having it. Lisa spent all of it. Not recklessly, thoughtfully, even. A nicer apartment. A car upgrade. Better restaurants. Small subscriptions that added up. By the time the next raise came, those expenses had become baseline. They no longer felt like upgrades. They felt like necessities. And so the next raise got absorbed the same way, into a lifestyle that had quietly expanded to require every dollar she earned. This is what behavioral economists call hedonic adaptation. The human brain is remarkably good at adjusting to new circumstances, which is a wonderful thing when those circumstances are bad, because we recover. But it's a quietly devastating thing when those circumstances are good, because we stop feeling the improvement. The raise that once felt like abundance becomes the floor. Then the next raise raises the floor again. And somewhere in that cycle, you find yourself earning $78,000 a year and feeling just as financially tight as you did at $55,000. Morgan Housel put it plainly in The Psychology of Money. The hardest financial skill, he wrote, is getting the goalpost to stop moving. Not because people are greedy, but because the social environment we live in is constantly and subtly redefining what enough looks like. The car that felt aspirational at 25 feels ordinary at 30. The apartment that felt luxurious feels cramped at 33. The lifestyle inflates, and the inflation feels so natural, so gradual, that it's almost impossible to see from the inside. After 3 raises, Lisa's lifestyle required $78,000 a year to sustain. Ryan's required $60,000, even though they'd been earning the same income the whole time. That $18,000 annual gap in required spending, compounded through investing over 15 years, accounts for a staggering portion of the $508,000 difference between them. The raise isn't the problem. The raise is a gift. The question is whether you let the gift compound quietly in your future, or let it dissolve immediately into a lifestyle that adjusts to require it within 6 months. Here is possibly the most straightforward financial mistake a working person can make, stated plainly, turning down free money. Ryan and Lisa's employer offered a 4% 401k match. For every dollar they contributed up to 4% of their salary, the company would match it dollar for dollar. A 100% instant return on that portion of their contribution, guaranteed, before the market does anything at all. Ryan enrolled immediately. 4% of $55,000 is $2,200 a year. His employer added another $2,200. He was effectively earning $57,200 that first year, not $55,000, just by completing a form. Lisa didn't enroll. She looked at the 4% contribution and saw a reduction in her take-home pay. She couldn't afford to lose that right now, she told herself. Later, when things settled down financially, she'd look into it. Things never quite settled down. She never quite looked into it. Over 15 years, with that employer match compounding at market rates, Ryan accumulated approximately $72,000 from the match alone. Money his employer handed him for participating in a program that was available to both of them. Lisa accumulated $0 from the match. Because she never took it. Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize partly for his work on retirement savings behavior, spent years studying why people don't take advantage of employer matches, and what he found is that it's almost never about the math. People understand, when it's explained clearly, that a 100% return is a good return. The barrier is psychological. The contribution feels like a loss from today's paycheck. The match feels abstract, distant, not quite real. We are wired, in the language of behavioral economics, to weight immediate costs more heavily than future gains, even when the future gains are mathematically enormous. There is exactly one guaranteed 100% return available to a working person in America. It is the employer match. Declining it is the only legal way to turn down free money, and millions of people do it every year because the immediate cost feels more real than the long-term gain. At 22, Lisa went on a vacation she'd been looking forward to for months. A week away. Flights, hotels, dinners, experiences. It cost $3,000, which she put on her credit card at 22% APR. She didn't have the cash saved up, but the trip was happening, her friends were going, the flights were booked, and she'd pay it down over the next few months. She paid the minimum each month. $63. It felt manageable. The vacation lasted 1 week. The debt lasted 17 years. By the time that $3,000 balance was fully paid off, through 17 years of minimum payments, Lisa had paid $12,978. The week in the sun cost her nearly $13,000. And the part that makes this particular story so uncomfortable is that by the time it was paid off, she couldn't clearly remember the trip. The experiences had faded. The debt had not. Ryan took the same trip. Same destination, roughly the same cost. But he spent 4 months before the trip putting aside money each month specifically for it. He arrived with $3,000 in savings, paid for everything in cash, and came home with a $0 balance and nothing to pay back. Same trip. One cost $3,000. One cost $12,978. Dan Ariely, one of the most widely read behavioral economists alive, has spent years studying what he calls the pain of paying. When we pay with cash, there's a real psychological sting, the money leaves and you feel it. Credit cards mute that pain. The payment is deferred, invisible, abstract. You enjoy the vacation fully, without the discomfort of watching money leave. But the bill arrives anyway. And it arrives with interest. And because the pain was delayed, the spending decision was made without the natural psychological break that cash spending provides. Ariely's research with Dražen Prelec showed that people consistently spend more, on more things, when using credit cards versus cash, not because they're reckless, but because the mechanism of payment shapes the feeling of spending. The card doesn't feel like money until the statement arrives. And by then, the decision is already made. Lisa didn't make $13,000 decisions on that vacation. She made a $3,000 decision with a $13,000 mechanism. And she made that same kind of decision, over and over, on purchases she could no longer name by 35, until she had $23,000 in credit card debt and had paid $41,000 in interest on things she couldn't remember buying. At 28, both of them had their cars break down within the same month. Different cars, different problems, same repair cost, $1,800. One of those moments that life sends without warning, without concern for timing, without any interest in whether it's convenient. Ryan reached into his emergency fund, $5,000 he'd built up slowly over 3 years, sitting in a high-yield savings account, and paid the repair bill. It was inconvenient. It reduced his cushion. He spent a week rebuilding it. But he never went into debt over it, never paid interest on it, and never felt the event metastasize into something larger than a car repair. Lisa didn't have emergency savings. She never quite got around to building them. There was always something more immediate to use the money for: a trip, a bill, a gap between paychecks. She put the $1,800 on her credit card at 22% APR and began paying the minimum. The $1,800 car repair cost her $3,400 by the time it was paid off. And this is the structural trap that Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shaffer describe in their book Scarcity. They spent years studying the psychology of financial constraint and found something counterintuitive: the experience of financial scarcity doesn't just limit what you can afford. It limits how you think. When you're operating without a financial buffer, your mind narrows, it focuses intensely on the immediate problem in front of it, at the expense of long-term planning, strategic thinking, and the kind of slow, patient financial decisions that build wealth over time. It's not a character flaw. It's a cognitive consequence of living without slack. People without emergency funds aren't poor planners. They're caught in a structure where every unexpected event becomes a debt event, and every debt event adds another monthly payment to a life that already feels financially tight, and every additional payment makes the next unexpected event more likely to become a debt event too. The cycle doesn't require bad decisions to sustain itself. It sustains itself through ordinary life, lived without a buffer. An emergency fund isn't a luxury. It's the firewall between your present financial life and the compound damage of unpredictable events. Every month you go without one is a month you're one car repair, one medical bill, one broken appliance away from a debt that will cost you twice what it should. At 26, Lisa's boyfriend needed a car. His credit wasn't strong enough to get approved on his own, and he asked Lisa if she'd co-sign the loan with him. $15,000. She loved him. She wanted to help. She said yes. They broke up at 27. He stopped making payments at 28. Lisa was legally responsible. The lender didn't care about the relationship, the breakup, or the circumstances. Her name was on the loan, and the loan was in default. Her credit score dropped 140 points. She applied for a new apartment after the breakup and was denied, or approved only with a significantly higher security deposit, because her credit profile now reflected a delinquent loan she'd never intended to be hers. She spent the next 3 years making payments on a car she'd never driven, for a relationship that no longer existed, while her credit slowly rebuilt itself. The total cost, payments she hadn't budgeted for, the damaged credit affecting her borrowing costs on everything else, the higher deposits, was north of $15,000. And unlike most financial mistakes, this one didn't come from a lapse in judgment about money. It came from a very human impulse. She was trying to help someone she loved. This is what behavioral psychologists call affective forecasting, our tendency to make decisions based on how we feel right now, without accurately predicting how future emotional circumstances will change our experience of those decisions. At 26, co-signing felt like an act of love. At 28, it felt like a legal obligation to a stranger. The gap between those two emotional realities is enormous, and we cross it regularly, because the brain that makes decisions in the warmth of a relationship is not the same brain that processes the consequences in the coldness of its aftermath. The practical rule is almost uncomfortably blunt: never co-sign for anyone. If a person needs a co-signer, the bank has already done its analysis and concluded that this person represents a risk too high to accept on their own. You are being asked to absorb that risk on their behalf. Love doesn't change the math. It just makes you less likely to read the contract. When Ryan was offered his first job, the initial offer was $53,000. He asked for $55,000. Cited his background, expressed genuine enthusiasm for the role, and made the case simply and without apology. After a short back and forth, they agreed. Lisa received the same offer. She accepted the first number. $53,000 versus $55,000. $2,000. Seems almost irrelevant, less than $40 extra a week. But salary isn't a static number. It's a base. And every future raise, every internal promotion, every competing offer at the next company is calculated as a percentage of that base. Over 15 years of 3% annual raises, a completely average, unremarkable trajectory, Ryan's salary compounded upward from a $55,000 starting point. Lisa's compounded upward from $53,000. That $2,000 starting gap, growing through percentage-based raises year after year, created a cumulative earnings difference of $47,000 before either of them changed jobs. Then Ryan negotiated again at his second employer. He had an offer of $70,000. He asked for $78,000. They met at $76,000. Lisa took $70,000 at the same job level because she was grateful for the offer and didn't want to seem difficult. The compounding gap from salary negotiation alone, across a career, exceeded $130,000. Linda Babcock, an economist who has spent her career studying negotiation behavior, found in her research, detailed in the book Women Don't Ask, that the failure to negotiate a first salary costs the average worker more than $500,000 over a career when you account for raises, promotions, and compounded lifetime earnings. And the reason people don't negotiate is almost never ignorance. It's social anxiety. The fear of seeming greedy. The fear of losing the offer. The discomfort of asking for something directly when accepting it silently feels safer. Every dollar you don't negotiate is a dollar you've permanently donated to your employer. Not for 1 year. For every year that follows, because the number you accept today becomes the denominator for everything that comes after it. At 27, Lisa bought a new car. She'd wanted it for a while. It was a reasonable aspiration, not an extravagance by any standard she was aware of. A $32,000 vehicle, financed over 48 months at 6.5% APR. The monthly payment was $762. She drove it off the lot and it immediately began losing value. By the time she made her last payment 4 years later, she had spent $36,576 on a car that was worth $18,000. She had paid $4,576 in interest and watched $14,000 simply evaporate through depreciation, the quiet, relentless cost of owning a new vehicle that no one mentions in the showroom. Ryan bought a used Honda Civic the same year. $9,000, paid in cash. Same transportation. Same ability to get from one place to another, through traffic and weather and the ordinary demands of daily life. 0 monthly payment. 0 interest. A car that held its value reasonably, because it had already gone through most of its depreciation curve before he bought it. But here's where the story separates into something remarkable. Ryan took the $762 a month that Lisa was sending to her lender, the same $762 that was sitting in his budget, available, because he had no car payment, and invested it. Every month, for 48 months. Over those 4 years, Ryan invested $36,576 of his own money. By the time he was 40, that investment, left alone, compounding at market rates, had grown to $58,000. At 40, Lisa had a car worth approximately $8,000. One decision. One moment in a dealership at 27. A $50,000 difference by 40. The economist Thorstein Veblen described this pattern more than a century ago, the tendency to purchase goods not primarily for their utility, but for what they signal to others. Luxury, or the appearance of it, as a form of social communication. Robert Frank expanded on this in Luxury Fever, arguing that in modern consumer culture, this signaling behavior has become so normalized that people make profoundly expensive financial decisions based on aspirational identity rather than functional need. The car is the clearest example of this in middle-class financial life. Nobody needs a $32,000 car to get to work. But many people need to feel like someone who drives one. That feeling, when financed at 6.5% over 48 months, costs $50,000 by the time the compound math plays out. So here you are. You've watched the Ryan and Lisa story play out across 15 years, 8 decisions, a $508,000 gap. And maybe you're sitting with a question that most personal finance content never quite answers honestly: what do you actually do with this? If you're in your 20s right now, the answer is almost uncomfortably simple. This week, not next month, not when things settle down, this week, open an investment account. A Roth IRA if you have earned income and your income is under the threshold. A brokerage account if not. Put $50 in it. Just $50. That's it. Not because $50 will change your financial life, but because the act of starting, the account existing, the habit beginning, changes your relationship to the process. The foot is in the door. The inertia has been broken. Next, find out if your employer offers a 401k match. If they do, contribute exactly the match percentage. Not more, not less, just enough to capture every dollar of free money they're offering you. This is one phone call to HR, or 10 minutes on your benefits portal. That one action, if your employer matches 4% of a $55,000 salary, is worth $72,000 over 15 years. No investment strategy can guarantee that kind of return. Your employer already has. And then, simply never co-sign for anyone. No matter the relationship, no matter the circumstances, no matter how certain you are that it won't be an issue. The bank has already assessed the risk. Your job is not to absorb it. If you're in your 30s or 40s reading this, if you've been watching the Ryan and Lisa story and quietly calculating where you stand, I want to say something that most finance content doesn't bother to say: it is not too late. Not even close. The compound interest math rewards starting as early as possible. That's true. But the same math also means that the money you invest today will still compound for the decades ahead of you. A 35-year-old who starts investing $300 a month will have, depending on market conditions and time horizon, somewhere in the range of $340,000 to $400,000 by 65. That is not a consolation prize. That is a meaningful, life-changing amount of money, built from a decision made today. The sunk cost of your past doesn't have to define the trajectory of your future. There's a tendency, deeply human, psychologically understandable, to feel that if the best window has passed, action now is somehow pointless. It isn't. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now, today, with the phone in your hand and the account not yet opened. Peter Gollwitzer, a psychologist who has spent decades studying the gap between intention and action, found something that changed how researchers think about behavior change. The people who followed through on their intentions weren't more motivated than the people who didn't. They were more specific. They had formed what he calls implementation intentions, concrete when-then plans. When I get home tonight, I will open the investment account. When I arrive at work tomorrow, I will email HR about the 401k match. Specificity collapses the distance between knowing and doing. You know what to do. The distance now is just the space between reading this and doing the first thing. Ryan and Lisa are both 40 now. Let's put the whole picture on the table, all 8 decisions side by side, and look at what each one actually cost. Not starting to invest early, a 7-year delay in the same $200 monthly contribution, cost Lisa $212,000 in compounded wealth relative to Ryan's trajectory. Lifestyle inflation with every raise, spending 100% of every income increase versus saving half, accounted for an $18,000 annual gap in savings and investing, which compounded over 15 years into a foundational difference in net worth. Ignoring the 401k match, declining to contribute 4% to capture a 100% employer return, cost Lisa $72,000 in match contributions alone, sitting in Ryan's account and not hers. Credit card minimum payments, financing experiences and purchases at 22% APR instead of saving for them, cost Lisa the difference between $3,000 purchases and $13,000 outcomes, multiplied across a decade of similar decisions. No emergency fund, leaving herself structurally exposed to every unexpected expense, transformed routine emergencies into debt events and fed a cycle of mounting interest that consumed income that could have been saved or invested. Co-signing a loan, one act of generosity toward a relationship that ended, cost her $15,000 in direct payments plus years of credit damage that made every subsequent financial move more expensive. Not negotiating salary, accepting first offers across 2 employers, created a $130,000 plus career earnings gap that compounded through 15 years of percentage-based raises. And the car, one financing decision at a dealership at 27, created a $50,000 difference by 40 between a vehicle worth $8,000 and an investment worth $58,000. $508,000. Built from 8 decisions. Spread across a decade. Made by a person who was smart, capable, hardworking, and operating with completely normal human psychology. And that's the thing I want you to sit with for a moment. Because it's easy to watch this story and quietly file Lisa under what not to do. To treat her as a cautionary character in a financial morality tale. But Lisa isn't a cautionary tale. She's a mirror. She didn't make these 8 decisions because she was reckless. She made them because nobody showed her the math. Nobody sat down with her at 22 and drew out what a 17-year credit card balance actually looks like. Nobody told her at 25 that her first 5 years of investing were more valuable than the next 10. Nobody explained that her employer was offering her $72,000 she was quietly declining. Nobody showed her, at a car dealership, that $762 a month invested looks like $58,000 in 13 years. She didn't know. That's the whole explanation. That's the complete story. And now, whatever your age, whatever your current account balance, whatever the decisions already behind you, you know. That's not a small thing. Information, at the right moment, is the difference between the Ryan trajectory and the Lisa trajectory. Not intelligence. Not discipline. Not income. Just knowing what you're looking at, clearly enough to make a different choice. The next 15 years start today. Not when things settle down. Not when you make more. Not after the next paycheck. Today, in whatever form starting takes for where you currently are. Every principle in this story works from any starting age. The math simply rewards you more generously for starting now than it will for starting later. Which means later, the most expensive thing you can choose, is already behind you. If this is the kind of thinking you want more of, not just what to do with money, but why we do what we do with it, and what the patterns underneath our financial lives actually look like, subscribe. Next week, we're going into how minimalists think about money differently. And it's not about spending less. It's about something much more interesting than that.